Moving into our first home was supposed to be the start of a new chapter for my husband, Luke, and me. After years of renting, it felt surreal to finally have a place we could call our own. The house wasn't anything fancy, just a modest, cozy little 2-bedroom, but it was ours, and that's what mattered. 7 months in, we were still settling in, balancing unpacking with decorating and trying to keep up with the never-ending list of maintenance tasks. While exhausting, it was also rewarding. Then there was Mia, my 17-year-old sister-in-law. She'd recently gotten her driver's license, and with her newfound freedom, she started popping over to our place frequently. At first, I thought it was sweet. I assumed she just wanted to spend more time with Luke, but it didn't take long for her visits to feel intrusive. She stopped calling ahead and started treating our house like her personal lounge. Sometimes she'd even let herself in if the door was unlocked. Her lack of boundaries was glaring. Mia would rifle through our fridge, commandeer the TV remote, and help herself to our stuff without asking. It was frustrating, but I tried to be patient. After all, she was a teenager, and maybe she didn't realize how her actions came across. But her comments? Those were harder to overlook. Once, she jokingly said, "You know my brother is still mine, right?" With a fake sweet smile that made my skin crawl. I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. It was as if she saw me as competition, not family. The final straw came one Friday night. After dinner, Mia showed up unannounced and asked to stay over. I didn't love the idea, but didn't want to seem harsh, so I agreed. She asked to use our shower, and since our guest bathroom wasn't fully stocked yet, I told her to use ours. What could go wrong? She'd shower, we'd watch a movie, and that'd be that, or so I thought. Instead, I walked into my bathroom after her shower to find a mess. Half my shampoo bottle was gone, my conditioner was almost empty, and my skincare products, everything from face wash to my prescription cream, had been opened and used. My don't touch boundaries weren't just crossed, they'd been bulldozed. I stood there in disbelief, staring at the mess Mia had left behind. It wasn't just the scattered bottles and used-up products. It was the blatant disrespect. My prescription cream, something I needed for my skin issues, had been opened and tampered with. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. When I confronted her, she denied everything. "Did you use my shampoo and conditioner?" I asked, holding up the nearly empty bottles. "No," she said flatly, not even bothering to look up from her phone. "Mia," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know you used them. They weren't like this before." She shrugged. "It's just shampoo. What's the big deal?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "It's not just shampoo. It's expensive, and it's mine. You didn't ask. And did you use this?" I held up the prescription cream. "It's medicated and not safe for anyone else to use." Her expression didn't change. "I didn't know it was such a big deal. Don't be selfish." Selfish? That word hit me like a slap in the face. I was letting her stay in my home, use my bathroom, and be comfortable, and somehow I was the selfish one? I didn't want to escalate things further, so I told her, as calmly as I could, "Next time, bring your own products. Don't use mine, especially not the prescription cream." Instead of apologizing, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "Fine," before walking out of the bathroom. The next morning, she left without saying much. I hoped, really, that it was over. But when she showed up a few days later, unannounced as usual, things got worse. I'd taken precautions after the first incident, tucking my products away in a drawer to avoid another confrontation. Yet, when I went into the bathroom later, I found the drawer open and my prescription cream was out on the counter again, less than before. This wasn't an accident. She'd gone looking for it. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. After I'd explicitly told her not to use my products, she'd gone out of her way to ignore me. It wasn't just disrespectful, it felt calculated. That night, I told Luke what had been happening. "She's just a kid," he said, his tone sympathetic but hesitant. "Maybe she doesn't realize how much it's bothering you." "She's 17, Luke, not 7, I snapped. She knows better than to go through someone's things, especially after being told not to. This isn't an accident, it's a choice. He nodded, clearly seeing my frustration. You're right. We'll set some boundaries. She shouldn't be coming over unannounced, and she definitely can't use your stuff anymore. Hearing him agree was a relief, but I knew enforcing these boundaries wouldn't be easy. Mia had already proven she didn't take me seriously, and I doubted that would change anytime soon. Still, I thought things would calm down after our talk. I was wrong. A few days later, we went to his parents' house for dinner. I wasn't thrilled about it. I was still stewing over Mia's behavior, but I told myself to play nice and avoid drama. That plan went out the window the moment Mia walked into the room. Her face was a disaster. Red, peeling, covered in angry breakouts. It looked painful. At first, I felt bad for her, assuming she'd had a reaction to some new product. But before I could ask if she was okay, she turned to me, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. "This is all your fault," she said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. I froze. "Wait, what? You didn't warn me that your skincare could mess up my face," she snapped. It took me a second to process what she was saying. She'd used my prescription cream again, despite my warnings, and now she was blaming me for her reaction? "I didn't know you used it," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "I told you not to." She crossed her arms, her tone growing more hostile. "You should have warned me that it was too strong." The room fell silent as everyone stared at us. Before I could respond, my father-in-law jumped in. "Why didn't you tell her it wasn't safe?" he demanded, glaring at me like I'd done something wrong. "I did tell her," I shot back, my frustration bubbling over. "I told her not to use it, and I put it away, and she went through my stuff anyway." "She's only 17, he said dismissively. "She doesn't know any better." "That's not an excuse," Luke cut in, his voice steady but firm. "She's old enough to understand boundaries. She ignored them. This isn't my wife's fault." The argument spiraled from there. My in-laws insisted I should have done more to prevent this, locked up my products, been more responsible. It didn't matter that Mia had blatantly ignored my warnings. In their eyes, I was the adult, so it was my job to fix everything. By the time we left, I felt utterly drained. Luke tried to reassure me on the drive home, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being villainized in a situation where I'd done nothing wrong. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The morning after that disastrous dinner at Luke's parents' house, I woke up still fuming. I replayed the events over and over, trying to figure out how things had escalated so quickly. No matter how I sliced it, I couldn't see how I was in the wrong. I'd set a boundary, explained it clearly, and taken steps to avoid further conflict, but somehow, I'd been painted as the villain. Luke could see how frustrated I was. Over breakfast, he tried to comfort me. "They've always coddled Mia," he said, his voice tired. "She's the youngest, so she gets away with everything. They'd rather blame someone else than hold her accountable." "Yeah, and I'm the perfect scapegoat," I muttered bitterly. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out. Just try not to let it get to you, okay?" I nodded, but it was easier said than done. A few quiet days passed, and I started to think the worst of it was behind us. Then Luke got a call from his mom. Apparently, Mia had been complaining nonstop about me, telling everyone who would listen how mean and territorial I was. She claimed I didn't want her using my products because I was trying to assert my dominance. Seriously? Who even talks like that? Luke relayed all of this to me, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Now my cousins are texting me, asking why you're being so cruel to Mia," he said, shaking his head. "She's turning everyone against me," I said, my voice tight with anger. "All because I wouldn't let her treat my stuff like it's hers. How is that unreasonable?" Luke sighed. "It's not, but you know how she is. She always has to be the victim." I didn't know what bothered me more, the fact that Mia was twisting the story, or that people were actually buying into it. I'd hoped that setting boundaries would solve the problem, but things were only getting worse. Then came the final blow. One afternoon, Luke got another call from his mom. This time, She sounded more serious, even accusatory. Mia had told her that I'd let her use my products knowing they'd mess up her skin. She made it sound like I'd deliberately set her up, like I'd handed her the prescription cream and said, "Here, ruin your face with this." I couldn't believe it, Eve. "She's making me out to be some kind of monster," I told Luke after he hung up. "She's lying," he said firmly. "She's trying to shift the blame because she doesn't want to admit she screwed up." "But your parents are eating it up," I said, throwing my hands up in frustration. "They're acting like I'm the one who caused this mess when all I did was tell her not to use my stuff." Luke rubbed his temples, clearly at a loss. "I don't know what to do anymore. They're so wrapped up in defending her that they won't even listen to reason." That's when it hit me. If they weren't going to listen to me, I needed someone they would listen to, someone with authority. "I'm going to the dermatologist," I said. Luke looked at me surprised. "Why?" "I need a new prescription cream anyway, and maybe they can help me figure out how to deal with this. If Mia wants to keep making baseless accusations, I want something concrete to back me up." He nodded slowly. "That's actually a good idea." I made the appointment for the next day. When I explained everything to the dermatologist, how Mia had used my prescription cream without permission, and how it had damaged her skin, they were incredibly understanding. "This is more serious than you might realize," they said. "Prescription strength products are tailored to specific conditions. When used incorrectly, they can cause reactions like this." "I know," I said, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. "But her family is acting like it's my fault." The doctors shook their head. "It's not. The reaction was caused by misuse, plain and simple. If needed, I can provide a statement confirming that." "Really?" I asked, surprised. "Of course, and you should also know," they continued. "Using someone else's prescription medication without permission could be considered medical theft." I blinked. "Medical theft?" "Yes," they said. "Prescriptions are legally protected for a reason. If someone knowingly uses your prescription product without your consent, especially after being told not to, that's a serious matter." Hearing those words made something click. Mia's actions weren't just annoying or disrespectful, they were potentially illegal. I left the office with a formal statement from the dermatologist and a lot to think about. Filing a police report felt extreme, but as I replayed everything Mia had done, my anger grew. She wasn't some clueless kid who didn't know better. She was 17, fully capable of understanding boundaries, and she'd chosen to ignore them, twice. That evening, I showed Luke the statement and explained what the doctor had said. At first, he was hesitant. "Filing a report might make things worse," he said. "But it'll protect us," I argued. "If they keep pushing this narrative that I'm the bad guy, we need something on record to back us up." He thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. They need to understand how serious this is." Armed with the dermatologist's statement, we decided it was time to confront his family, again. Only this time, we weren't holding back. The next day, Luke and I went to his parents' house, determined to clear the air, or at least make them understand the seriousness of the situation. The tension in the house was palpable as we walked in. Mia was on the couch, scrolling on her phone like nothing was wrong, while Luke's parents greeted us with strained smiles. "We need to talk," Luke said, his tone leaving no room for debate. We all sat down in the living room, and I could feel my heart pounding. I reached into my bag and pulled out the dermatologist's statement. "We spoke to a dermatologist," I began, keeping my voice steady. "They confirmed that Mia's reaction was caused by misuse of my prescription cream. These products are safe when used as directed, but they're not meant for anyone else." Before I could continue, Luke's mom cut in, her tone defensive. "She didn't know that. You should have made it clearer." I took a deep breath. I did. I told her not to use my products, multiple times, and I put them away. She went through my drawers and used them anyway. "That's not an accident." Luke jumped in, his voice firm. The dermatologist also pointed out that using someone else's prescription product without permission is considered medical theft. This isn't just a minor mistake, it's serious. His dad leaned forward, scowling. "Are you saying you're going to report her to the police?" "We're saying that we could," Luke said. "We don't want to, but if this keeps escalating, we'll have no choice." Mia didn't just ignore boundaries. She lied about it, blamed my wife, and made this into a much bigger issue than it needed to be. Mia finally spoke, her voice shaky but defiant. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her eyes darting between us. "I just thought it would be fine. I didn't know it would cause all this." Her words felt rehearsed, like she was trying to position herself as the victim. "You didn't know?" I asked, incredulous. "I told you not to use my products. I tucked them away to avoid another incident, and you still went digging through my things. How is that not deliberate?" She looked away, but her parents immediately jumped to her defense. "She's just a teenager," her mom snapped. "You're acting like she's some kind of criminal for making a mistake." "She's 17, I replied, my voice even but firm. "She's old enough to drive a car, but she can't read a label or respect basic boundaries? This wasn't a mistake, it was a choice." "Even so," her dad said sharply, "this is family. You're really going to hold this over her head over some shampoo and cream?" Luke shook his head. "This isn't about the products," he said, cutting through their excuses. "It's about respect." Mia knew what she was doing, and instead of apologizing, she's been spreading lies and making my wife out to be the bad guy. That's not okay. Mia stayed silent, her expression unreadable, but I wasn't done. "You've been telling everyone that I'm territorial and mean," I said, my voice rising slightly. "You've twisted this whole situation to make yourself look like the victim, and now your parents are blaming me for something you did. How is that fair?" Her face turned red, but she didn't respond. Her mom tried to jump in again, but Luke cut her off. "If this doesn't stop, we're filing the report," he said firmly. "We're not going to let this continue." The room went silent. For the first time, it seemed like his parents realized how serious we were. His mom looked rattled, and his dad seemed to be weighing his next words carefully. Mia finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to ruin anything. I didn't think it would get this bad." Her words felt hollow. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry for the consequences. After a long, tense discussion, we left their house without a real resolution. Luke's parents didn't apologize or admit their daughter was in the wrong, but they seemed shaken by the possibility of legal action. Mia didn't say much else, and I could tell she knew she'd crossed a line, even if she didn't want to admit it. On the drive home, Luke sighed heavily. "They're not going to change," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I know," I said, staring out the window. "But at least now they know we're serious." It wasn't the closure I'd hoped for, but it was something. I could only hope that this would be the wake-up call Mia needed to finally take responsibility for her actions. That night, just as I was starting to relax, there was a knock at the door. Luke and I exchanged a glance. It was late, and we weren't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there stood Mia. Her face was blotchy and red, not from the reaction this time, but from crying. She looked miserable, a far cry from the smug teenager who had rolled her eyes at me just days ago. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. I hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. Whatever this was, it needed to be dealt with, and I wasn't about to have this conversation on the porch. Luke stayed nearby, leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed as Mia sat down on the couch. "Please," she started, her voice cracking. "Please don't file the police report. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I'll pay you back for the products I used. I swear. Just don't ruin my life over this." Her words hit me like a bucket of ice water. She wasn't apologizing for what she'd done. She was begging me to save her from the consequences. It wasn't remorse. It was fear. I took a deep breath, my voice calm but firm. "You ignored my boundaries and then tried to make me look like the bad guy. You're not a little kid, Mia. You knew exactly what you were doing, and now you're facing the consequences of that." Her tears came harder, and she started wailing, glancing desperately at Luke as if hoping he'd jump in to defend her. But he didn't budge. When it became clear she wasn't getting anywhere, she snapped. "She's ruining everything!" she yelled at Luke. And you should leave her." That was it. My patience snapped. "Are you kidding me right now?" I shouted, my voice shaking with anger. "You come into my house, go through my things, lie about it, spread rumors to make me look bad, and now you're standing here calling me names in my own home? Get out!" Her jaw dropped, like she couldn't believe I'd stood up to her. She turned to Luke, tears streaming down her face. "Are you seriously just going to let her talk to me like that?" "You need to leave," Luke said, his tone firm. "She's right. You crossed every line, and instead of owning up to it, you're doubling down. This isn't her fault, it's yours." Mia froze for a moment before grabbing her bag and storming out, slamming the door behind her. I turned to Luke, my chest heaving with anger. "I'm done. She's not stepping foot in this house again." He nodded, his expression weary. "I know. And you're right. This has to stop." The next morning, we filed the police report. Filing the police report wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Mia's behavior had crossed too many lines, and her refusal to take responsibility left us with no other option. The process moved faster than I expected. When the authorities questioned Mia, she broke down almost immediately. At first, she stuck to her story, claiming she'd only used the cream because I let her, and that I hadn't warned her about the risks. But under questioning, her version fell apart. Eventually, she admitted the truth. She'd gone through my drawers intentionally, ignored my warnings, and used the prescription cream not once, but twice. Then came the bombshell. She confessed that she'd done it just to piss me off. Hearing those words felt like a gut punch. I'd suspected her actions were deliberate, but having it confirmed made it all the more infuriating. She wasn't clueless or careless, she was spiteful. With her confession on record, the situation became clear-cut. The authorities ruled that her actions constituted medical misuse and vandalism, and her parents were held financially responsible. They were ordered to reimburse me for the wasted prescription cream, the fines for misusing medical products, and even the dermatologist fees I'd incurred to fix the mess she caused. For a brief moment, I thought this might be the wake-up call her family needed. Surely, after hearing Mia admit she'd done all of this on purpose, they'd realize how wrong they'd been to defend her. Surely they'd apologize. They didn't. Instead, they doubled down. Luke's parents stopped talking to me altogether, acting as if I were the one who'd done something wrong. His mom even accused me of manipulating Luke into filing the report, saying I was tearing the family apart. "She's your sister-in-law," she'd said during one of her rare, terse conversations with Luke. "You're really going to let your wife drag her through the mud over this?" Luke stood firm. "She dragged herself through the mud," he told her. "She admitted what she did, and you still refuse to hold her accountable. That's not on us." I could see how much the strain was wearing on him. No matter how supportive he was of me, it hurt him to have his relationship with his parents so fractured. I hated that Mia's actions, and their refusal to acknowledge them, were putting him in this position. But I couldn't back down. This wasn't just about shampoo and cream anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and taking a stand against entitlement. If I'd let it go, Mia would have learned nothing, and the cycle of enabling would have continued. Still, it stung to be painted as the villain. Luke's cousins, aunts, and uncles started pulling away, clearly siding with his parents. Some even unfollowed me on social media, as if I'd committed some unspeakable crime. For weeks, the silence from his family was deafening. The only updates I got were from Luke, who tried to keep me in the loop without overwhelming me. "Mom's still upset," he said one night as we sat on the couch. "She says she's worried about how this will affect Mia's future." I scoffed. Mia's future? She should have thought about that before she decided to lie and use my stuff out of spite. Why is it always about her feelings? What about mine? Luke sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. They've always coddled her and now it's backfiring, but they don't want to admit that." As much as I appreciated his support, I couldn't help feeling isolated. The people who were supposed to be my family had turned against me, all because I refused to let Mia walk all over me. And then there was Mia herself. She hadn't spoken to me since her confession, and honestly, I preferred it that way. I didn't want an apology if it wasn't genuine, and based on her previous behavior, I doubted she'd changed. But despite the tension, I knew I'd done the right thing. Without consequences, Mia would have kept pushing boundaries, testing how far she could go. By standing my ground, I'd drawn a line in the sand, not just for her, but for myself. I wasn't going to let anyone, family or not, treat me with such blatant disrespect. One evening, Luke and I sat down to talk about everything. "Do you think they'll ever come around?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He hesitated, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know," he admitted. "They're stubborn, but even if they don't, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your dignity to keep the peace." I leaned into him, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thank you," I whispered. "No," he said, wrapping an arm around me. "Thank you for putting up with all of this. You didn't deserve any of it, but you handled it better than I ever could." His words gave me the strength to keep moving forward, even as the rift between us and his family widened. If they couldn't see the truth, that was on them. All I could do was focus on the people who truly mattered, Luke and myself. The aftermath of the police report had left our world a little quieter, a little lonelier. But it also left me with a sense of clarity. Sometimes doing the right thing means losing people who refuse to respect your boundaries. And while it hurt, I knew I'd made the right choice. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly began to settle into a new normal. The fallout from Mia's actions had left cracks in Luke's family, ones that didn't seem likely to heal anytime soon. Luke's parents continued to keep their distance, though they occasionally sent passive-aggressive messages through extended family. "She's still your sister," one of his aunts texted him one day. "Family is more important than pride. You and your wife need to make this right before it's too late." Luke didn't bother responding. We spent most evenings quietly at home, away from the drama, focusing on our own little world. I poured myself into work and hobbies, trying to find peace amid the chaos Mia had left behind. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes, I'd catch myself replaying the arguments or reading too much into the silence from Luke's family. But I reminded myself that I'd done everything I could to handle the situation fairly. One late evening, Luke and I sat on the back porch, sipping tea and enjoying the cool air. "Do you regret it?" I asked, breaking the comfortable silence. He didn't need me to elaborate. "Not at all," he said firmly. "I hate how things ended with my parents, but this isn't on us. Mia crossed every line, and they refused to hold her accountable. That's their choice." I nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. "Sometimes I wonder if I should have let it go," I admitted, my voice soft. "It would have been easier." "Maybe?" he said, leaning back in his chair. "But easier doesn't mean right. If you'd let her get away with it, she wouldn't have learned anything. She needed to face the consequences, even if it cost us." His words stayed with me, a small but powerful reminder that standing up for myself had been the right call. Mia, for her part, had stayed out of our lives since the police report. I hadn't seen or spoken to her since she stormed out of our house that night. From what I'd heard through the grapevine, she was embarrassed, though not necessarily remorseful. It seemed she was more upset about being caught than about what she'd done. As for Luke's parents, they still refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing on Mia's part. They paid the court-mandated restitution without a word, but their silence spoke volumes. It was clear they were holding a grudge, convinced that I was the one who'd torn the family apart. At first, their coldness stung. I'd tried so hard to be a part of their family, to build a bond with them, only to be cast aside the moment I stood up for myself. But over time, I realized their behavior said more about them than it did about me. One evening, Luke and I received an unexpected message from Mia. "I want to talk," she wrote. I stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to leave the past where it belonged, but another part of me was curious. "Should we?" I asked Luke, handing him my phone. He read the message, his expression thoughtful. "It's up to you," he said. "But if you decide to hear her out, don't let her manipulate you again." I nodded, my heart racing as I typed out a response. A few days later, Mia showed up at our door. She looked nervous, a far cry from the smug teenager who'd rolled her eyes at me all those months ago. "Thanks for meeting with me," she said quietly as she stepped inside. Luke stayed nearby, his presence a silent show of support. Mia sat on the couch, wringing her hands as she spoke. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she began. "I know I messed up. I shouldn't have gone through your things or lied about it. I was being stupid and immature." Her apology caught me off guard. For the first time, it felt genuine, not an attempt to save face, but an acknowledgement of her actions. "I appreciate you saying that," I said cautiously. "But do you understand why this hurt me so much? It wasn't just about the products. It was about respect, something I feel like you never gave me." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I do. I get it now. I was jealous of how close you and Luke are. I felt like I was losing my brother, and I took it out on you. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." Her words hung in the air, raw and unexpected. I took a deep breath, letting her apology sink in. "I'm glad you're taking responsibility," I said finally, "but it's going to take time to rebuild trust. You hurt me deeply, Mia, and it's not something I can just forget." She nodded again, her tears spilling over. "I understand. I wanted to make things right." After she left, Luke and I sat in silence, processing everything. "Do you think she meant it?" he asked. "I think she did," I said slowly, "but actions speak louder than words. We'll see." In the weeks that followed, Mia kept her distance but occasionally reached out with small gestures, an apology card, a bouquet of flowers, even an offer to babysit our dog when we went out of town. Slowly but surely, her efforts began to feel sincere. Luke's parents, on the other hand, remained distant. And while it hurt to have that rift in the family, I knew I couldn't control their choices. What mattered was that Luke and I were stronger than ever, united in our commitment to protecting our peace. Looking back, I wouldn't change how I handled things. Standing up for myself was hard, but it taught me an important lesson. Sometimes the people who refuse to respect your boundaries are the ones who don't deserve a place in your life. And while forgiveness was still a work in progress, I'd found something even more valuable: my self-respect story, too. "My dad made me pay for all my college expenses," is the headline of this article. He now boasts about getting my younger brother an apartment so he won't have to share a house. I did this, and now they are pleading. Hello, everyone. I've started a new Reddit channel, which is significant news before we get into today's video. The background isn't Minecraft this time. In keeping with the season, there are subway surfers and a Christmas motif. Take a look, subscribe, and get involved. The description contains links. See you there. Let's begin the video now. When I was 17, I worked weekends at a downtown cafe, cleaning counters and making cappuccinos for patrons. It was my work, even though it wasn't the glamorous one I had envisioned. It did not, however, make my parents, Greg and Susan, very happy. For them, working as a barista was a career death sentence, only a stopover before their true dream. For me, law school. Greg was always talking about how attorneys had security, were respected, and that I would be well off. Susan used her favorite statement to support him. "Leo, imagine how proud we would be. Everyone would be envious of us because of you." My desires were never the focus. They were always the focus. They wanted to show me off as if I were a prize. Leo, the esteemed attorney. The issue? I had no desire to go law school at all. I had no dreams about case law or courtrooms. Debates and defending companies didn't interest me. However, my desires were irrelevant to my family. They considered my life to be their own endeavor, and the ultimate aim was law school. No buts, ifs, or ands. Caleb, my younger brother, was living the dream in the meanwhile. Or, more accurately, My parents hoped to have a golden child. Even though he was 4 years younger than me, Caleb had managed to become their favorite without even trying. He managed to get everything handed to him, while neither working or worrying. His greatest achievement was persuading my parents to replace his phone every 6 months, yet he would still boast about how smart he was. At first, it wasn't like I detested Caleb. I wanted to be helpful because he was my younger brother, but it was difficult to ignore the partiality, as I was trying to balance job and school. Caleb was having a great time, coasting through high school with no worries. When he had trouble with arithmetic, my parents went above and above for him. When he grumbled about his ancient automobile, they hired the greatest tutor in town. They purchased a brand new Tesla Model 3 for him. Naturally, the Tesla became the focal point of their boasts. Caleb is the youngest student in his class to own a Tesla, in case you were unaware. Susan would spill her guts to her pals. He just is really responsible. In charge? In fact, Caleb had no idea how to pump petrol. However, I suppose that was irrelevant when your vehicle was powered by electricity. I was scrounging together as much time and money as I could to meet their expectations for my future while all of this was going on. Greg would tell me every time I returned home after a long shift that maintaining excellent grades is essential if you want to get accepted into a reputable law school. He pretended that I possessed a time machine of some sort that would allow me to work, study, and sleep simultaneously. I wasn't exactly being lazy. To maintain a respectable GPA, I was working double shifts on the weekends and studying every night. However, they believed that perfection was the only acceptable state. You must put forth more effort, Leo. As if I wasn't already exhausted, Susan would say, "We are discussing your future here." I would clench my teeth, nod, and resume my work. I mean, what else could I do? There was no way to say no. Not in my family. It was like debating with a stone wall when you couldn't agree with Greg and Susan. Tiresome and useless. They only remind me of the sacrifices they made for me to succeed, guilt-tripping me into obedience. But in reality, I wasn't the reason behind their sacrifices. They were for their reputation. Greg enjoyed sharing with his colleagues that his kid was destined to go law school. The praise Susan received from her friends regarding my driving was her life. They weren't on my side. They were making investments for their own pride. I first believed that I might be able to make it work. Perhaps I would graduate from college, enroll in law school, and manage to make a name for myself. However, the more I studied it, the more I saw that this was not my dream. They owned it. And I began to push back in my own quiet manner, more and more, as they pressed. I no longer volunteered for school extracurricular activities. Despite the fact that it would put a strain on my finances, I began working fewer shifts at the cafe. Naturally, Caleb didn't see any of this. He was too preoccupied with maintaining his small, privileged world. He would moan about his private tutor's inability to understand his study style or the sluggish touchscreen on his Tesla when he got home. Every minor problem was immediately fixed by my parents, pretending that Caleb was a delicate prince who was incapable of being bothered. And I was essentially invisible while they were occupied with meeting all of Caleb's needs. If I had an issue, it was dismissed. Leo Greg, your elder, would advise you to work things out on your own. It was annoying. Yes. However, I kept convincing myself that things will improve if I just waited a little while longer. After graduating from college and attending law school, I would finally have enough money to move out and start again. That hope was like a lifeline to me, even though I knew in my heart that it was unrealistic. Although I didn't want to acknowledge it, the cracks were beginning to emerge. Not quite yet. I continued to work away at a future I didn't really desire, keeping my head down. Caleb continued to get everything on a silver platter throughout this time. I didn't despise him. Not yet, but I could sense the animosity gradually intensifying, like a storm threatening. I regret not standing up for myself sooner. However, I was unable to envision a way out at the moment. I was attempting to live up to expectations that were never mine in the first place, and I was caught in a vicious cycle of guilt and duty. What's the worst? I doubted that I would ever have the opportunity to escape. Hence, one day, following a hard day of classes in the morning, a cafe shift in the afternoon, and an evening spent at the library trying to understand tort law, I was on the verge of passing out by the time I arrived home. All I wanted to do was eat, take a shower, and perhaps look at my phone till I fainted. Rather than that, I entered the kitchen right into the midst of a wild party. Susan and Greg looked almost radiant. I was shocked that their faces hadn't broken because of how big their smiles were. My mom was pouring glasses of sparkling water as if we had won the jackpot, while Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table, looking as arrogant as ever. "What's happening?" I asked, putting my suitcase down and glancing suspiciously about. Susan's eyes glistened with anticipation as she turned to face me. "Leo? Oh, you're right on schedule. We have some amazing news." Greg rushed right in before I could even guess. "Caleb is receiving a down payment from us for the place of his dreams." As if that were the most casual thing ever, he stated it. As though every 18-year-old reached this milestone on a regular basis. I blinked. "Hold on, what? A deposit? Isn't that incredible?" Susan cried. "It's a stunning location in the heart of the city, close to all the hip places. This is ideal for Caleb. Lots of room, lovely vista, contemporary conveniences. After all his effort, he deserves it." Clearly enjoying the attention, Caleb grinned. "Yes, it's pleasant or something. However, the kitchen is somewhat tiny." Tiny. I was shocked to hear that. "Despite receiving a luxurious flat, you are whining about the kitchen." Susan snapped, "Leo." She frowned as her smile faded. "Don't begin. For your brother, this is a significant occasion. Be pleased for him." Joyful? I was barely able to stay afloat. To make enough money for books, gas, and tuition, I'm working 2 jobs. Additionally, Caleb was receiving a down payment on a high-end apartment because he disliked living in dormitories. Greg chose to speak out after noticing my mounting annoyance. "Leo, this is an investment. It's for the entire family, not just Caleb. This location will be valued and appreciated when he graduates and begins his profession. It's well-thought-out planning." Again, clever planning. I couldn't help but sound sarcastic. "He doesn't want to share a flat, therefore you're purchasing him an apartment. Planning isn't that. He is being spoiled by it." Susan folded her arms. Her tone was defensive right away. "Don't be so resentful, Leo. This is the result of Caleb's hard work. He deserves it." I laughed at it. "Earned it. How? By attending classes. By requesting a new phone every half a year. Leo, by being your favorite." Greg said in a firm, low voice, "That's enough. We will not let this escalate into a brawl. This is something Caleb deserves and cannot be disputed." After remaining quiet for the majority of this conversation, Caleb made the decision to speak up. "It's not my fault that they believe I'm more deserving. I lost my temper. You don't believe it's your fault, of course. Nothing in your life has ever required you to work for it. If hard work struck you in the face, you wouldn't recognize it. Leo." Susan's tone, which she saved for when she felt I was acting inappropriately, had become sharp. "This must end. You should be pleased for your brother because he has done nothing wrong. Why don't you simply stand by him, encourage him?" I had the impression that I was in a different reality. "Do you want me to back him up?" "Yes, I'll be on his side, like you've helped me, don't you?" "Oh, hold on. You haven't. Not once." Greg's cheeks flushed. "Leo, we've done a lot for you. Don't pretend that we haven't given you any chances. Prospects." I said it again, almost yelling. "What opportunities now? For my own college costs? Putting in extra hours to pay for books. I'm too busy trying to balance things on my own to sleep more than 5 hours every night. Yes, thanks for all the opportunity, Dad." Susan rolled her eyes and remarked, "You're being dramatic." "The circumstances are different, Caleb." "What's different?" "Because he's younger," I retaliated. "Because you like him the most? Because I'm hurting my back every day and he doesn't have to do a thing." Greg took a step forward, his voice low and foreboding. "Don't say it to your mother. Caleb has objectives. His attention is on his studies. He is acting in accordance with his duties. You ought to be taking notes." It was that. The sparkling water glasses rattled as I slapped my fist down on the counter. "Is it okay if I take notes? All right. This is what I've discovered. You have to be Caleb if you want anything in this family. That's the only thing to take away from this experience." There was a brief silence in the room. No one spoke. Naturally, Caleb ended it with a theatrical sigh. Leo, this is the reason no one wants to spend time with you. You're constantly so pessimistic. I gave him a scowl. The reason for this may be that I don't have everything given to me. Susan gave a headshake, staring at me as if I were a letdown of some sort. Leo, I'm not sure what's bothering you. You seem extremely unappreciative. Not appreciative? I gave a sour laugh. You're correct. I should be appreciative. I am thankful that I am the only member of our family that is expected to be self-sufficient. I'm thankful that whereas Caleb is given everything at random, I'm working myself to death. Yes, thank you very much. I snatched up my suitcase and hurried upstairs without waiting for an answer. I slammed my bedroom door shut, my pulse racing and my hands trembling. Their voices were muted, but their delight at Caleb's new home was still audible to me below. I spent the remainder of the evening in my room, attempting to tune out the noise of their festivities. I would sometimes hear bits and pieces of their conversations and phone calls with some family friends, with Susan raving about the apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows, Greg boasting about how easily accessible all the greatest places were by foot, and Caleb griping about the second bedroom's lack of space. I wanted to yell and storm downstairs to express my disapproval of their priorities. I knew it wouldn't matter, though. They didn't give a damn about my feelings or thoughts. Caleb and his idealized family were all that mattered to them. I came to a realization while lying in bed that night and gazing up at the ceiling. I would never be sufficient for them, know of how hard I worked or how much I accomplished. They'd already decided, and it wasn't me. I would always be the one left behind, and Caleb would always be their golden boy. I sensed something was wrong as I came into the driveway the next day, having just ended a long 8-hour shift at the cafe. Before I even got out of Caleb's Tesla, I could hear arguing since it was parked at a strange angle. Caleb was pacing the living room when I arrived home, as if his dog had just been ran over. Greg was standing near the window, and Susan was wringing her hands on the couch. He crossed his arms like a sullen investigator. What's happening? Leaving my suitcase outside the entrance, I inquired. Caleb whirled. His face became red with annoyance. My automobile was scratched by someone. I arched an eyebrow. Is it scratched? By scraped, do you mean? He gestured wildly in the direction of the driveway. Find out for yourself. With a groan, I went back outdoors. Indeed, there was a little, imperceptible scrape on the side of his vehicle. It wasn't really profound. To be honest, it appeared to be something that might be improved with a little work. However, Caleb's behavior gave the impression that the word loser had been keyed across the hood. It's a scrape. When I returned inside, I remarked, "The car still runs, doesn't it?" Caleb yelled, "That's not the point." "How much will it cost to fix this, do you know?" I gave a shrug. "Not at all. But based on your current meltdown, I'm assuming it's not worth it." Leo. Susan stood up and said, "Don't be rude. You're not supporting your brother when he's unhappy. What is causing your distress? That there is a small flaw with his expensive automobile," I fired back. At last, Greg, who had been silently ruminating by the window, said, "Where did you go this morning, Leo?" It was a surprise question. "What? In the office. Why?" His look was impenetrable as he turned to face me. "Did you ever go close to Caleb's car?" I blinked. The number. Why am I close to Caleb's vehicle? When Susan believed she was being clever, she invariably cocked her head and folded her arms. "You've been behaving a bit irritated recently, though. Perhaps you let it out on the vehicle." I laughed, but it was a sour, piercing chuckle. "Are you serious? Do you believe my envy caused me to scratch Caleb's car? That is absurd," Greg responded. "We're not accusing you." But his tone betrayed that. However, it's not entirely impossible, is it? Ever the opportunist, Caleb grinned. It would make sense after all. Perhaps you wanted to communicate. What I was hearing was unbelievable, incredibly so. I shook my head and mumbled, "Behaving defensively isn't helping you," Greg added in a controlled, icy tone. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry," in a sarcastic tone. "Should I just admit that I did something wrong? Would you feel better after that?" "Leo," Susan cautioned, "you must relax." "Slow down," I yelled. You have no proof to support your accusation that I damaged my brother's automobile, and you'd like me to relax? Greg took a step forward and spoke firmly. You're not being accused of anything. All we're doing is attempting to determine what went wrong. Here's an idea, though, I remarked, giving them all a fierce look. Caleb may not want to acknowledge that he scraped at himself. Newsflash: automobiles occasionally get scratched, so it may have been a random accident. Caleb gave an eye roll. Why would I damage my own vehicle? That isn't even logical. Accusing me doesn't help either. I returned fire. Enough. Greg let out a bark. His voice reverberated across the space. Leo, this isn't about you. Give up making everything about yourself. I gave a sour laugh. I realize this isn't about me, I assure you. There is never anything. I slammed the door behind me and went upstairs after grabbing my suitcase. I sat on the edge of my bed with trembling hands and a racing heart. They were unbelievable to me. I could hear them conversing below. Although their voices were muted, they could still be heard talking in brief bursts. Susan sounded uneasy, suggesting that perhaps we shouldn't have mentioned anything. He must mature. Greg answered, It is unacceptable to act in this manner. Do you also believe that I am the immature one? I whispered to myself. I spent the remainder of the evening in my room, trying to ignore Caleb's complaints about his automobile and my parents' assurances that everything would be well. Susan would occasionally go on about how Caleb's Tesla was a testament to his progress. I felt like screaming. What caused their blindness? It wasn't Caleb's fault. He was pampered. He had no idea how to deal with even the smallest annoyance without losing his temper. They just made it possible for him to do so rather than confronting him about it. To put it mildly, the situation at home was heated following the Tesla scandal. Every time I walked into a room, I could feel their eyes pressing down on me, as if they were expecting me to admit to something I hadn't done. Naturally, Caleb was taking advantage of the circumstance. In order to remind me and everyone else nearby that he was the victim, he always made sure to whine loudly about the scratch whenever I was present. The house's air felt oppressive. I mostly hid in my room since every discussion seemed like a landmine ready to detonate. However, that was insufficient to avoid the ongoing criticism. I was seated at my work one evening when someone knocked on the door. Greg entered without waiting for a response. Crossed arms. We need to talk, he stated in his typically direct manner. With a groan, I put my book down. Now what? Greg wasted little time. Your lecturer called. You're not performing well in his class, he says. Would you mind explaining? Already worn out from the talk, I massaged my temples. I'm attempting to balance a full course load while working a full-time job. It's quite a bit. Greg said, You knew this was going to be hard, as though it somehow made things easier. You must take this seriously if you wish to be admitted to law school. No justifications. No justifications. I said it again, feeling my annoyance rise to the surface. I'm trying my hardest, Dad. To cover my tuition, I'm working 2 jobs. Since you refuse to assist, and now you're saying that I'm not making enough of an effort. You aren't? He stated bluntly. Your grades wouldn't be declining if you were. That was it. The final straw. With a loud scrape on the floor, I got out of my chair. Do you not understand? You've never understood. I'm exerting a lot of effort to make this work, and when I don't measure up, you just give a damn about what your pals think, Greg said in a low, menacing voice. Watch your tone. No. Pay attention to your tone. I fired back, finally releasing all of my repressed rage. You don't care what it's doing to me. You just want me to be this flawless little lawyer so you can boast about it. You haven't. Susan suddenly materialized in the doorway with her arms folded. What's happening, Leo? You're shouting at your father, but why? I yelled, because he doesn't listen. Not one of you does. You're too preoccupied in worshiping Caleb to pay attention to anything else. Susan scowled, her voice adopting the patronizing tone I had grown to hate. This has nothing to do with Caleb, Leo. It concerns you. We're concerned about you because you're not living up to your potential. Concerned about me? I gave a sour laugh. No. You're concerned about your appearance because of me. Susan maintained, it's not that we are comparing you, even though that was precisely what they were doing. Simply put, Caleb is more concentrated. He has a lot to teach you. I could, of course, I responded, cynicism leaking from my voice. He? Everything I do is a letdown, whereas everything he does is flawless. Leo, Greg stated abrasively. You're exaggerating. Susan's voice was firm. You must stop blaming Caleb for your problems. I yelled, I'm not blaming Caleb. I'm holding you accountable. While I'm drowning over here, you're the ones that treat him like a king. What's the worst? Your expectations of me are higher than what you are prepared to provide me. Not much at all. Greg's face flushed, and I briefly believed he was about to blow up. Rather, he inhaled deeply and remarked, Maybe you should take a break and figure out what you really want if you're so unhappy. Stunned, I gazed at him. Do you think I ought to quit? I'm telling you to sort out your priorities, he answered. I chuckled, but not in a joyful way. It was the type of chuckle you have when you're very upset. There's nothing else you can do. All right, I replied. Do you want me to discover my desires? I want this. I'd like to leave. Susan's gaze expanded. What does that signify? It indicates that I'm finished, I remarked as I picked up my luggage. I'm done attempting to meet your absurd standards. I'm done dying myself for someone else's fantasy. I've finished everything. Don't be silly, Leo, Susan remarked. However, her voice now sounded panicked. I'm not being absurd. I spoke aggressively. I'm finally taking care of myself. Without anticipating a reply, I passed them on my way to my room. Even though my hands were trembling, I continued packing a suitcase. I was unable to. I was aware that I would be drawn back into their world of responsibility and guilt if I lingered for a moment longer. I put a letter on the kitchen table after finishing. I require room. Stay away from me. It seemed unreal the night I left. As if I were seeing the events of another person's life. I had nowhere to go, no clear strategy, and no idea what to do next. I ignored the few times my phone buzzed with Susan's missed calls. Another guilt trip wasn't something I was prepared for. I simply strolled. Until I was outside the cafe where I worked, I had my duffel bag draped over my shoulder. One of my colleagues, Mark, was getting ready for bed. He raised an eyebrow and glanced up. What are you doing outside, Leo? I take it you're not on duty? No, I answered in a monotone voice. All I needed was a place to go. After examining me for a while, Mark nodded. Would you like to crash at my house? I blinked. Really? Yes, dude. I have a sofa. Although bumpy, it's better than stumbling about all night. I couldn't be fussy, but it wasn't exactly a 5-star deal. Regards. Silently, I said. Mark lived above a laundromat in a cramped, messy flat. He had suggested a couch that felt like a lifeline, but it was actually rather bumpy. I laid there looking at the damaged ceiling that first night, feeling a weird mixture of comfort and horror. I felt free of my parents' expectations for the first time, even though I had no idea what the next day would hold. The weeks that followed were a haze of survival. In an effort to save money for my own house, I took on extra shifts at the cafe. Without expecting anything in return, Mark was kind enough to let me rest on his couch. However, I knew I couldn't remain there indefinitely. Aaron and I met together during one of those additional shifts. He looked different, and we hadn't seen each other since high school, more certain. As if they had discovered their life's purpose. His countenance brightened when he saw me behind the counter and requested a black coffee. It's been forever, Leo, dude. Yes, I'm not joking. As I gave him his coffee, I spoke. How are you? Excellent. Leaning on the counter, he spoke. I currently work as a photographer and graphic designer, mostly freelance. How about you? I paused, just trying to figure things out here. Aaron's eyes glowed with wonder, yet he nodded as if he understood. Have you ever considered doing anything artistic? I chuckled. Me? No. There is nothing creative about me. You'll be surprised, he smiled. How about dropping by one of my photo sessions sometime? Take a look at it all. A part of me was fascinated, but I wasn't sure whether he was serious. Yes, I finally said. Why not? Aaron and I met a few days later at a little studio he had hired for a picture session. Aaron was jumping around with an almost infectious excitement, and the room was crowded with lights, backgrounds, and decorations. He handed me a camera and said, Here. Assist me with the setup. I have no knowledge in photography. Holding the camera as if it were about to bite me, I confessed. Aaron grinned and replied, "You'll learn." I watched Aaron work for the next few hours. Whether he was guiding the models or setting the lighting, he had a knack of making everything appear simple. Aaron didn't seem to object when I attempted to take a few photos myself, even if they weren't particularly good. He once nodded toward the camera and remarked, "You've got a good eye." I chuckled. "You're only being kind, I believe." "No, really," he demanded. "You have promise. I can teach you the fundamentals if you're interested." I paused. It was freeing to think of studying something new that had nothing to do with law school or my parents' expectations. Yes, I did say that at last. That would be nice. Aaron took on the role of mentor throughout the ensuing weeks. He showed me how to work with customers, frame a photo, and utilize Photoshop. Although there was a significant learning curve, I felt enthusiastic about my work for the first time in a long time. One afternoon, when we were editing pictures from a previous session, Aaron commented, "See, I told you you'd be good at this." I answered, "I'm not sure about good," but I couldn't help but smile. He answered, "You just need practice." "But you're passionate. The difficult aspect is that." Zeal. I hadn't used that word to describe myself in years. Aaron was correct, though. I was beginning to sense it. I've been away from my parents' place for months now. My life had entirely changed. I rented a tiny studio apartment that was barely large enough to turn around in, but it was mine, after sleeping on Mark's rough couch. I had transitioned from making lattes and fighting to make ends meet, to working as a freelancer with Aaron, balancing design assignments and photography engagements. I felt like I was truly in charge of my own destiny for the first time. Greg and Susan, my parents, didn't think so. A few weeks after I departed, their messages began to come in. However, the trickle became a deluge when it became evident that I would not reply. Initially, it was a combination of fake concern and guilt-tripping. "We must speak, Leo." In one voicemail, Susan's voice could be heard. "You're making snap judgments. We must speak." However, they were not patient. As the weeks passed, Greg's tone became more acerbic. "Leo, you're being really self-centered. Are you aware of the damage you have caused to this family?" Susan's masterwork of dramatic guilt followed. "You have no idea how humiliating this is for us. We are at a loss for words as people continue to inquire about you. We are embarrassed by you. They had no worries about me. They were upset that I was no longer doing my designated function. Their idyllic family story was unraveling without me, the son they could boast about." My phone was vibrating on the counter when I got home one evening after a long day of picture editing. Once more, it was Susan. I replied against my better judgment. She snapped as soon as I picked up, "Leo, at last. How concerned have we been, do you know?" I leaned sideways and against the counter. "Mom, what do you want? What am I looking for?" Her voice rose as she repeated, "I want my kid to return home and quit being such a self-centered brat." Her tone astounded me, and I blinked. "Are you saying that I'm selfish?" She spat. "Yes, selfishly. Without saying a word, you abandoned this family. Are you even aware of the harm you have caused us? Leo, people are talking. They are posing inquiries, and I'm embarrassed, as is your father." "Mortified," I murmured, my tone brimming with irony. "That's what matters to you, not me. How I make you appear to your friends, not how I'm doing. Don't change the facts." Greg's voice interrupted. He must have been waiting to leap in, sitting right next to her. "This has nothing to do with looks. You're squandering away your future here. You had everything planned out. There was a promising future for you, but you squandered it because you couldn't manage a little effort." I laughed resentfully. "Work hard. Do you believe that I quit because I couldn't stand being hard-pressed? I've spent years busting my ass. I worked jobs, paid for education, and did everything I could to meet your unattainable standards. For what purpose? So you could give everything to Caleb and disregard me. Don't include your brother in this." Greg let out a bark. "Caleb puts forth a lot of effort and gets what he deserves." I chuckled once again, but louder. "Does it earn it? Just for being alive, he receives a Tesla and a down payment. To pay for my books, I was working extra shifts in the meantime. Yes. I think that sounds good. Susan's tone was abrasive and patronizing. This animosity isn't your style, Leo. Caleb is intent. He has objectives. He has a lot to teach you. Caleb doesn't have to teach me anything. I lost my temper. I've discovered that no matter how hard I work or how much I accomplish, it will never be enough for you. You've said that rather clearly. You are behaving like a kid, Greg said in a furious tone. Right now, you're over here having a tantrum because you're jealous of your brother's success. Feeling envious? I fired back. I'm not envious. I'm repulsed. I'm shocked that you are unable to recognize how obviously you have favored him throughout his life. I'm devastated that you've never stood by me. The manner in which you assist him. I'm also horrified that you're still attempting to deceive me into believing that I'm the issue. How dare you talk to us like that, Leo? Susan spoke in a shaky, angry voice. This is your way of repaying your father and me for everything we have sacrificed for you. You are a source of shame. Greg's tone became stern and demanding. Leo, you have to repair this. You must put an end to this absurd uprising. Return home and resume your legal studies. Your life will be ruined by this small experiment of yours. I inhaled deeply while trying to maintain my composure. No, Father, you're not correct. Trying to live up to your expectations was the one thing that was destroying my life. I'm not returning. Never, ever. Though it was more rage than melancholy, Susan's voice cracked. Leo, you will come to regret this. It will be too late by the time you understand how much you've thrown away. No, I spoke aggressively. I will only regret squandering so much of my life in an attempt to get your approval. We're done talking. Don't give me another call. I hung up after that and blocked their numbers for a little while. I simply stood there and gazed at the phone I was holding. I had a racing heart. Despite my trembling hands, I was not depressed. I felt no remorse. I was liberated. It was difficult to break off relations with them. They were my parents. And a part of me had always hoped that they would see me for who I truly am one day. However, it was not going to occur. Neither Greg nor Susan could ever really comprehend or encourage me because they were too preoccupied with their own egos and too partial to Caleb. Their disappearance seemed like a weight being lifted off my shoulders in the days that followed. The never-ending comparisons, the unachievable expectations, and the continuous judgment, they had all vanished. I came to a realization one evening while editing pictures in my small apartment. They weren't missed by me. Not Greg, not Susan, not Caleb. Breaking off contact with them was more than simply a way to get out of their grasp. For the first time in my life, it was about selecting myself. And I wasn't scared for once. I didn't require their blessing. I didn't require their approval. For the first time, I could live my life as I pleased. And that was more than sufficient. Story 3. After I founded his business and my parents supported him, my brother took advantage of me for 2 years. They are now pleading for pardon. Following my move. Hello everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Reddit, hello. I've been reading all the crazy stories on this site for years, but I never imagined that I'd have one of my own to tell. But now that I'm going through what feels like a nightmare that has evolved into a vengeance tale, I thought it was time to share everything. Okay, so this is the situation. I'm a 27-year-old man who recently received my degree in computer science. I was finally finished after all those late hours spent studying, living off of instant noodles, and trying to raise my GPA. I was prepared to begin my career, perhaps get a respectable job, and truly lead a productive adult life. However, my 41-year-old brother then jumped in with what he described as a once-in-a-lifetime chance. One of those men who believes he's always the sharpest person in the room is my brother Jack. He somehow persuades everyone that he is a genius by acting and speaking like a giant. I wasn't really surprised when he informed me that he and his 2 partners were launching a finance and investment firm. Jack adores being the boss and the limelight. To build up the foundation for their new business, Jack stated that they needed someone they could rely on. He informed me that you're the ideal man for this. We need someone who is intelligent, trustworthy, and won't let us down. That final bit should have been a warning sign, but I was too enamored with the compliment to see it. I first reasoned, why not? This is only a summer job. I reasoned that after assisting them with system setup and gaining some experience, I would advance to a full-time position. He's also my brother. I felt that the least I could do was to assist him. Indeed, assisting him ended up being one of my worst choices ever. It looked simple enough when I initially started. They need someone to manage the technical aspects, including website design, email account creation, server setup, and more. Easy stuff, actually. Then, however, the position began to expand. All of a sudden, I was more than just the computer guy. I was welcoming customers, setting up meetings, and taking phone calls. After that, they had me handle accounts, perform errands, and even conduct research for their deal. I got the salary and all the offices in one place. Well, let's discuss compensation. They gave me maybe $7,000 in all over 2 years. Not a salary, that is. That's change from your pocket. I wasn't even regularly paid by them. Oh, here's a check for $500, it said. Don't spend all of it in one location. I was working full-time in the interim, occasionally putting in 60-hour weeks to meet their needs. Saying something like, hey, I thought I was just here for tech support. I made many attempts to bring it up. There seems to be much more to this. Jack would dismiss it as though I had joked. Come on, dude. We're building something amazing here, he would add. Everyone is contributing. Yes, but everyone else was getting paid, so that was the difference. We'll refer to his partners as partners A and B. We're having a good time. Expensive outfits, fancy automobiles, and continuous boasting about their business success. Surprisingly, I wasn't earning enough money to save for anything, so I couldn't even afford to repair my broken laptop. The worst was partner A. He spoke down to me in an arrogant manner, as if I were an intern who was unable to tie my own shoes. Each time I made a suggestion or inquired about payment, he would strike me. Partner, you might not be suited for this kind of employment. Alternatively, B was the quiet, cunning kind. He would use phrases like, we're counting on you, man, to guilt-trip me into staying up late or taking on more work. Don't disappoint us. They seem to have mastered the art of making me feel bad for requesting even the most basic of respect. But he was the mastermind behind it all, Jack. He had made these assurances to me, stating that you would become a member of the core team and your family once the business took off. Consequently, you will receive a larger portion of the pie, and each time, I fell for it. They're only getting started, I kept thinking. It's a difficult time, but things will improve. It didn't. As the company's success increased, they gave me less credit for my efforts. They began to treat me as though I was fortunate to be there at all. The way they handled me in meetings whenever customers or investors arrived was what truly made me take notice. I wasn't presented as the one who created our whole system. Not at all. I was only Jack's younger brother, who assists at the office. They were quite apparent that I wasn't on their team. All I did was do errands. I had had enough by the time 2 years had passed. I was tired, broke, and tired of their nonsense. I made the decision to return to school in order to earn my master's degree. But it wasn't a simple choice. I felt like I owed Jack something because of the way he did it, as if I were leaving them. Are you simply going to abandon us? When I informed him I was going, he said, following everything that we have done for you. Done for me? Are you serious? For 2 years, you have been taking advantage of me. But I didn't say that. I just informed him that this was no longer sustainable for me, and that I needed to concentrate on my future. Jack, however, didn't think so. I was ungrateful to him. All right. Oh, he said, do as you please. Just don't come back to haunt you once you've made a mistake. It was like pulling off a Band-Aid to leave that employment. To be honest, it was more of a relief than I had anticipated. It's over now, I thought. It's time to go. It wasn't over, though, not even close. Even though things had ended tragically, I thought Jack would soon calm down, and we would once again be a family. Not the greatest of friends, but at least polite. I didn't intend to prolong this drama. I wanted to put the issue behind me and concentrate on graduate school. For a while, everything appeared to be all right. In order to pay for my tuition, I had registered in my program, begun to establish a new routine, and even sent out my resume for part-time IT employment. I listed my employment at Jack's firm since, let's be honest, I had worked hard there for 2 years. I put in a lot of work. Even though it was a tiny business, I had played a key role in its setup and system management. I assumed that when prospective employers saw it, they would say, "Hey, this guy has experience." At least initially, the initial interviews went smoothly. My abilities, my training, and the tasks I had completed impressed everyone. They even appeared enthusiastic about the work I had completed for Jack's business. However, after a good start, strange things began to happen nearly every time. The atmosphere would change. I would receive kind but ambiguous letters such as, "We don't think you're the right fit for our team," or, "We've decided to move forward with another candidate." I initially assumed it was due to bad luck or fierce competition. However, with the 6th rejection, I began to question whether there was another factor at play. Then, a recruiter who had been assisting me called. It seemed as though she was reluctant to share her discovery with me. She eventually told me what the others had not, after considerable persuasion. Some of the firms I had applied to for reference checks had gotten in touch with Jack and his associates, and they categorically denied that I had ever worked there, rather than verifying my employment. She informed me that they were claiming you had never worked with them. They said you were lying to make your resume look better. I was taken aback. Why would they act in such way? I questioned her. She paused once more, then went on. They said that you attempted to use their name to advance, among other things. What more? They say you harassed female colleagues when you showed up at their office without permission. My heart fell. Not even that made sense. To begin with, I hadn't visited their office since the day I resigned. Second, while I worked for that firm, there weren't any female employees at all. Jack, his 2 partners, and I were the only members of his team. It was an obvious, repulsive falsehood. It was like getting struck by a truck when I heard this. They were not only undermining my work, but they were also tarnishing my reputation with accusations that could destroy a person's life. On a level I was unaware of, I felt deceived. In the hopes that there was a mistake, I contacted Jack right away. Perhaps someone was exaggerating, or perhaps the corporations had gotten in touch with the incorrect individuals. But no, when I mentioned it, Jack immediately burst out laughing and picked up the phone. He chuckled as if I had just told him the most hilarious joke he had ever heard. "What are you doing?" Trying to speak steadily, I asked. With a tone full of conceit, he added, "Because you're trying to screw with us. I'm not going to allow you to utilize my business to improve your resume. What exactly are you discussing? I spent 2 years working there. Your whole system was created by me. Are you aware of that? You shouldn't have left." I agree. That was sufficient justification, he added. I was trembling with rage. My prospects of finding employment are being ruined by you. Are you even concerned? Jack chuckled once again. He hung up after saying, "That's what you get for crossing us." Bewildered, I gazed at my phone. This was more than petty retaliation. The act constituted blatant sabotage. Jack wasn't only disappointed that I had gone. For it, he intended to ruin me. I debated what to do for days. I hoped that this would end quickly, and that Jack would see how crazy he was and stop. However, I was already in a bad spot. His falsehoods had caused me to be rejected by every firm I had applied to. I had no means to cleanse my record and no work prospects, so I was stranded. I made the decision to give him a taste of my own medicine at that point. I sought guidance from a counselor at my school. I had no idea where to begin. I explained everything to her, and she listened carefully. How Jack deceived employers, took advantage of me, and damaged my reputation. She remarked, "You need to take legal action," once I was done. This is now defamation, not simply a family conflict. I was struck strongly by the term lawful. My career is only getting started. I'm pulling someone to court my own brother, and now look at me. However, I knew in my heart that if I didn't stand up, he would simply keep stepping on me, and I would never get anywhere. 2 years of work without pay. The allegations, the falsehoods. He was destroying more than just my career. My entire existence was in his sights. I was able to locate a lawyer who specialized in defamation claims with the counselor's assistance. We reviewed everything: my work history, communications from potential employers, and statements from recruiters. A few weeks after Jack and his partners were served, we filed the case. I anticipated a response of some sort. Perhaps a denial or an apology. Rather, Jack phoned me and laughed as if it were the most hilarious thing ever. Actually, a lawsuit. "You're such a little bitch," he said. I made an effort to remain calm. "Jack, you've given me no other option. You told employers false things about me. Your charges were baseless and repulsive. Do you really think I'll overlook that?" "Oh, please," he sneered. "You will not prevail. Your time is being wasted." "Perhaps," I said, "but at least I'll make sure that everyone is aware of your character." Jack appeared unfazed. "Do what you please, young man. But when it blows up in your face, don't weep." After he hung up, I became aware of something. Jack had no intention of giving up. I was the target, and he was treating this like a perverse game. That just strengthened my resolve to finish this. The problem is that it wasn't simply Jack. My father became interested within days. I knew right away when he phoned that he wasn't calling to offer me support. "Look, this whole thing is absurd," he remarked. "You're exaggerating the situation. It's simply a little roughhousing between brothers. Family isn't sued. Roughhousing among brothers. Do you mean me?" Jack has laughed about it, made terrible accusations against me, and ruined my career. There was no roughhousing here. It was a whole new kind of treachery. My dad refused to listen to me when I attempted to convey that to him. His tone was sharp as he said, "You're taking this too far. You should put this lawsuit on hold and have a conversation with your brother to resolve the matter." Really, why don't I find this surprising? It's not that they treated me badly as a child or anything, but it was always obvious that they preferred Jack. My father had always harbored affection for Jack, who was impervious to wrongdoing. He was the golden child, the big guy in the family, and the one who was meant to continue the family name as a successful businessman. And me? I suppose I was just the quiet person who didn't draw attention to myself. Even so, I heard my own father totally disregard what I had endured, stung in an inexplicable way. Dad. He told employers false things about me. He made life-altering accusations against me. "We cannot simply have a conversation about this over dinner," my father sneered. "He is your sibling. Family is forgiving." I tried not to snap, so I bit my tongue. Does families ruin each other's reputations as well? Because he treated me that way. "Enough," my father replied, raising his voice. "From Thanksgiving until you realize your mistake, you are not welcome." My dad was prepared to completely cut me off because he was so committed to keeping Jack safe. It wasn't shocking, but it stung. In contrast, my mother remained silent for the majority of this. She didn't even attempt to mediate. She didn't text or phone me. She was clearly torn, caught between her husband and her youngest kid, but her quiet felt like a betrayal in its own way. When my sisters were involved, the situation worsened. At first, they were supportive. They were both upset with Jack and phoned me as soon as they learned about the case. "You're acting appropriately. According to one of them, he must accept the consequences." However, a week or so later, the tone changed. My sister's voice seemed uncertain this time when they phoned. They claimed to have discussed it and come to the conclusion that they could no longer be engaged. "This is simply too much for us." With a trembling voice, one of them spoke. "We can't cope with the stress, even if we love you." Feeling stressed, I raised my voice and asked, "What am I dealing with, do you know?" "Jack attempted to destroy my life, and stress is a concern for you." They broke down in tears and said they didn't want to pick sides since they felt torn. However, their behavior indicated differently. They said it was better that my girlfriend and I weren't invited to Christmas. It felt like a kick to the belly because it seemed like they were choose Jack and my parents over me. To exacerbate the situation, they informed my girlfriend via direct text that we were not welcome. She was furious. What on earth do they believe they are? As she paced our living room, she said, "They aren't even aware that they are supporting Jack's actions." In her caustic response, she criticized them for their lack of support and cowardice. Although I didn't like it, I couldn't hold it against her. She shared my feelings of hurt and rage. There was more family turmoil to come. My dad confronted us at the home of a family friend a few nights later. I suppose he learned that we would be attending the Christmas get-together, to which we had been invited. His face flushed with rage. He cornered us in the driveway. As soon as he saw me enter, my dad pointed his finger at me and shouted, "You need to stop this nonsense." His voice was icy and piercing. "Why have you come here at all? You are not worthy of being welcomed. You are no longer a family man. If you want to attend family get-togethers, you're throwing your own brother in court. Act like it, perhaps." For a moment I froze. I felt the sharp pain of his words. Then I lost it. "No, Father. The issue here is Jack. I'm only advocating for myself." His expression clouded. "You're being self-centered. Your pride is taking precedence over your family. Pride?" I shot back, raising my voice. "Do you believe pride is at play here? Jack falsely accused me of repulsive things, ruined my job, and lied about me. And you're standing up for him? How could a father do that?" His gaze flitted for a moment as if he was uncertain. I hoped that perhaps, just possibly, I had reached him. However, my girlfriend intervened. She had finished chewing her tongue. She spoke in a chilly tone. "You're a bad dad," she remarked. "In addition to supporting a bully, you're also blaming your other son." His face twisted. He was about to speak when his mouth opened. My girlfriend, however, forbade him. "Do not bother. Your decision has already been made. We can all tell where you're loyal." My mother, meanwhile, sat in the vehicle and watched in silence the entire time, as if she didn't want to participate in the discussion. She probably couldn't even hear us well. Or perhaps she simply didn't care enough to intervene. She was unable to confront the situation or what they had all permitted to occur. Everything became pretty evident that night. My father would not change. My sisters didn't support me because they were either too scared or too devoted to Jack, and my mother. She was overly docile. My fiancé, who had been my rock during this whole ordeal, and I were the only ones I could rely on. I believed I had reached the limit of how horrible things could become by the time the case began to gain traction. But unfortunately, my family wasn't making things any easier, and Jack and his associates weren't finished yet. It seemed like a fresh challenge every day. It might have been my parents phoning to get me to back down, or it could have been more bullshit from my brother. The tension was oppressive. Then, one evening, I came onto something that made my pulse race while searching through old files on my laptop. There was a folder with customer lists, contracts, and emails from my time working for Jack's firm, which I had entirely forgotten about. These files weren't simply any old ones. They were explosive. They weren't simply any lists of clients. Before Jack and his partner founded their business, they were taken from their prior employment. They had boasted at the time that these lists were the key to their success and the cornerstone of their whole company. At the time, I hadn't given it much attention, but now I see how damning this was. This was more than simply dubious. It was against the law. I just gazed at the screen for a while. My thoughts are racing. I thought of two things at once. First of all, Jack's case may be totally ruined. Second, it may ruin him as well. I'm not going to lie. I didn't intend to completely destroy his life as much as I wanted justice. I desired responsibility rather than destruction. Then I remembered all that Jack had done to me. He was quite happy to try to destroy my life. What was the reason for my hesitation to allow him to be held accountable for his own actions? I informed my lawyer about the papers when I phoned him the next morning. He responded instantly. "Now take them to the office." He went into overdrive when I dropped off the laptop. They phoned me back a few hours later and requested that I come in for an urgent meeting. My lawyer's expression was a mixture of seriousness and eagerness when I arrived. He said that these data alter everything. "We are handing this up to the United States lawyer's office." I blinked. "Hold on, the federal government." "Why?" He said, "Because this isn't just evidence for your case. This is proof of theft, fraud, criminal conduct, you name it. We have no control over it after the U.S. attorney becomes involved." That made me shiver when I heard it. I was reassured by my lawyer that this was the appropriate decision, but he warned me grimly too. "Get ready. This will become a nasty situation, and you should prepare yourself for the things your relatives may say about you while they are under stress." He was serious. Almost instantly, the repercussions began. The fact that their new lawyer abruptly changed course must have alerted Jack and his associates that the data had been given over. They began frantically attempting to recover everything they could, but their terror was clear. The first major setback was the closure of Jack's company with his partners. I wasn't shocked by it. With the feds breathing down their necks, they could not continue to operate. Even still, it was unreal to watch their business, which they had always boasted about, fail in an instant. Then the actual family turmoil really got going. When my dad contacted me again, he wasn't attempting to mediate the situation. He was enraged. "Are you aware of what you have done?" he yelled. "Your brother's life is being ruined by you." "No, father," I fired back. His own life was wrecked. You had the option to deal with this in private. He lost his temper. "The government has now been involved. You have no idea how embarrassing this is for our family. Disgraceful." He was concerned about that. Not the charges, not the falsehoods, not that Jack had attempted to ruin me, just the shame it caused to the family name. He seemed incapable of seeing the wider picture. Or worst, he was indifferent. Then he revealed the true surprise. "This might result in a subpoena for your mother and myself. We've been pulled into your mess by you." My mess? What I was hearing was unbelievable. It was Jack who had treated me like trash, lied to employers, and stolen client lists. However, I was somehow to blame for this. Even though my lawyer had forewarned me of this possibility, it nevertheless hit me hard. My father wasn't only unhelpful, he was deliberately placing the blame for everything on me. When my sisters called, the situation worsened. Both of them were sobbing as they expressed their want to stay out of the situation. "This is too much, even if we adore you." Too much was stated by one of them. Jack had been taking advantage of me, undermining me, and tarnishing my reputation for 2 years. However, it was me who was excessive. They seemed unable to disentangle their allegiance to Jack from the truth of his actions, and to be honest, I believe they were afraid. Jack had always taken charge and been the dominant sibling. It was difficult to oppose him, and they just lacked the guts to execute it, in my opinion. Jack's new lawyers contacted him in the interim to inquire about the terms of a settlement. They were obviously aware of their predicament, but I wasn't going to give them a pass, not after all that they had done to me. One idea kept coming to me as I watched the mayhem develop in my lawyer's office. The lawsuit is no longer the only issue here. Jack and his associates didn't just close their doors. They made an effort to portray themselves as victims, saying the litigation had forced them to shut and depleted their resources. It was clearly an attempt to win compassion, but it was failing. Between the papers pertaining to the client list and the current federal probe, their story was not credible. The moment the news leaked, everyone who had been collaborating with them or even contemplating it failed. Jack was not going to take this lying down, though. There was still one more thing he could do, attempting to use our parents as a means of guilt to get me to back off. My father phoned me once more the week following the closing of their business. He wasn't yelling this time, he was begging. "Don't you believe that this has gone far enough, son? Jack's business has been gone. Isn't that sufficient penalty?" I tighten my hold on the phone as my patience wanes. "It's not only about the company, Dad. He told employers false things about me, attempted to destroy my career by accusing me of repulsive things. The very least he deserves is to lose his business." My father's voice broke as he said, "Families remain united." That sentence was like nails on a chalkboard. Family sticks together. Even though I had heard it countless times as a child, it seemed like a weapon being used against me today. Why did Jack stab me in the back if family remains united? I lost my temper. He hasn't even apologized, so why am I supposed to forgive him? My father had no response to that. He changed tactics instead, attempting to play the victim himself. "I'm getting pulled into this along with your mother. Are you aware of the embarrassing nature of being subpoenaed due to your own children?" I firmly stated, "That's not my fault. If you feel ashamed, put the responsibility on Jack. It was him, not me, who made this mess." That was the end of the debate. But the harm had already been done. My mom still hadn't spoken to me directly, and my dad was still putting pressure on me. She remained in the background, as though she was expecting that if she ignored it long enough, the whole thing would go away. He wasn't ignoring anything, though, Jack. A few days later, I received a note from him that was the most enraged thing I had ever read. He wrote, "You got what you wanted. I'm broke, and the business is gone. Are you happy now? You were always a self-centered young brat." That was it. That's when I lost my temper. I had tolerated his conceit, deceit, and manipulation for years. However, he was behaving as though he was the victim. It was too much after everything he had done. I took a while to reply. Rather, I took a seat and jotted out all of the things I wanted to tell him. No sugarcoating, no holding back, when I submitted it at last. Even if it destroyed every remaining bridge between us, I didn't care. I wrote to Jack, "You've believed that you're superior than everyone else your whole life. You're now at last having to deal with the fallout from your actions. Here, you are not the victim. You told a falsehood. You took something. And for no other reason than to stroke your own pride, you attempted to destroy me. So, no, I'm not pleased with your financial situation. That others are now seeing you for who you truly are makes me happy. Look in the mirror if you want to assign responsibility for the events that have occurred. You are solely responsible for this." A few weeks later, Jack and his partners attempted to assert that I had verbally promised to labor for free during a deposition for the case. It was a last-ditch effort that failed. Emails, texts, and other documents my lawyer had provided demonstrated that I had been promised remuneration for my labor. Then the actual blow struck. They subpoenaed my parents to testify. I was advised by my lawyer that this would be difficult to witness. He was correct. My dad, who claimed to be living at home at the time, reaffirmed his belief that I had worked for free. We believed that to be his contribution to the family. It stung more than I anticipated, and it was an obvious untruth. However, what truly affected me was my mother's testimony. She said she had witnessed Jack repeatedly offer me money, but I had turned him down. "I don't need the money," he said. He was more concerned with supporting the family, so she testified. It felt like a kick to the belly to hear her say that. She was aware that it was untrue. She had seen how I struggled to make ends meet while Jack and his partners prospered, and yet here she was, lying to him on oath. "I know this is hard, but it's not going to change the outcome," my lawyer stated once it was finished. "The proof will disprove their falsehoods." He was correct. Jack and his companions eventually gave up a few weeks later. They consented to a settlement that included written apologies, retraction letters to each employer they had misled about me, and monetary compensation. In the court file, they also acknowledged their culpability, which pleased me more than I had anticipated. However, the true retaliation resulted from the client list file's aftermath. More criminal behavior, such as fake contracts and falsified signatures, was discovered by the federal inquiry. Jack and his associates were prohibited from ever again working in finance and lost their professional licenses. The news made me smile uncontrollably. Jack was utterly destroyed after living his entire life as though he was invincible. He had no industrial prospects, no business, and no reputation. Jack and his partners had become central to his identity, did more than simply sign the deal. They gave me $320,000 in all, which included further damages, and the salary they owed me for 2 years of unpaid labor. It was an easy breakup. They acknowledged my culpability, awarded me a settlement that matched the amount they owed me for my labor plus damages, and acknowledged that I was entitled at least $100,000 to $120,000 for the job I had done. Every employer they had deceived received a retraction letter from them as well. Clearing my name officially, the money wasn't the only factor. It was their admission that they had harmed me and that they would have to deal with the fallout. Although it appeared to be a win on paper, it felt inauthentic in practice. My family was in ruins, and I kept thinking that the harm would never be undone. His number was blocked by me. Following one last message, "You're nothing without this family," he had texted me. "I wish you luck when you're on your own." I didn't answer at all. I refused to give him the satisfaction, even though I knew he was attempting to beat me. Dealing with the consequences with my parents was more difficult. My mom wasn't any better, and my dad wouldn't talk to me. They didn't provide an apology or even acknowledge the extent of the harm, even after Jack acknowledged his fault in the settlement. They remained solidly in his corner instead, pretending that he was the true victim of this whole situation. I didn't see the need to maintain them in my life if they couldn't see past their heedless devotion to Jack, in spite of everything he had done at the time. I therefore cut them off entirely. No texts, no calls, and no attempts to patch things up. They made up their minds. I was now I'm concentrating on me now. I'm investing in my future and rebuilding my life with the settlement money. The majority of money will be spent to advance my work, with a portion going toward college loan repayment. In addition to working on a few side projects to establish myself in the computer industry, I have already scheduled certifications to broaden my skill set. I appreciate you reading all the way through. Family isn't about blood, if that's what I've learned from all of this. The individuals you trust the most and believe to be decent might sometimes be the ones who have damaged you the most.